Gank fights. Some people love them and some people absolutely despise them. Usually gank fights get a lot of hate within the community, unless you're Ornstein and Smo of course. But I wanted to go over most of the gank fights in the series to see which one is the absolute best. And if you're confused on what a gank fight is, well, they're basically a boss with multiple enemies in the same room. Now I'ma just say this now, this is just my personal ranking. Yours is most likely gonna look different and that's okay. Just let me know down in the comments below. Anyways, let's start with the first gank fight. Out of all the gank fights, this has to be the worst one ever. I mean, what was From Smoking making this bullshit? It's literally 3 generic looking NPCs stuffed into a cave and that's it. And you know what? As bad as that is, I would have gave it a pass if the fight was somewhat fun, but nope, they had to make it annoying. You see, there are 3 robbers, the one in the Havel armor which hits hard, a basic knight guy, and fucking Hawkeye over there shooting arrows at you. With fights like these, it's usually best to isolate each enemy and kill them one by one. But here's the thing, these guys are really aggressive. I mean, they're constantly on your ass throughout the whole fight, which makes it hard to pick them off one by one. However, as bad as the fight is, it's not all that hard, just a bit frustrating, that's it. I can't even think of a single good thing about this whole encounter. At first I wanted to call the Royal Rat Vanguard fight lazy since, you know, it's a room filled with a bunch of rats. But since they do serve a purpose lore wise, I was willing to give them a pass. However, the fight itself is still boring. Like come on, it's just a bunch of rats. Now the fight works like this. At first you get swarmed by a shit ton of them and eventually their master or leader will come out, and if you're wondering which one is the leader, it's the one with the goofy ass mohawk. After killing it, the other rats will run away and that's it. The problem here is that the combat just isn't fun. A swarm of rats doesn't make for an interesting or exciting fight, at least not the way it's handled in this case. I mean, to be honest, that's all I have to say about them. It's just a boring fight. If you've been on my channel for a while, you know how much I despise the Godskin duo. I mean man, I can't forget how much of a hard time I had while fighting them for the first time. I felt like I was trapped inside of Arkham Asylum due to the mental punishment I was going through while dealing with them. The issue with most Souls duo fights is that they don't complement each other really well, and unfortunately the Godskin duo have the same issue. I mean, they're both fast as hell and they pretty much shoot fireballs when you're trying to heal. And because of this, it makes the fight feel so frustrating. Plus they respawn and they have a decent amount of health, so you're gonna be here for a while. My least favorite one to fight is the Noble, as his damage seems to be way higher compared to the Apostle, and his range is crazy. His worst attacks is when he decides to roll all over the place. Sure, you can stand on the pillar to avoid this, but it just feels like a big waste of time as you have to wait until he stops, then you can attack him again. But here's the thing, as bad as this fight is, at least your music goes hard. Nowadays on newer playthroughs, I always make sure to bring sleep pots with me because, trust me, I don't want to deal with them for too long. The entire Belfry Gargoyles fight felt like they took a painting of whatever the original Bell Gargoyles were and smeared shit all over it. You're not fighting 1, not 2, but 3 gargoyles at the same time. Like, come on, for a game that prioritizes on one-on-one combat, Dark Souls 2 for some reason loves to throw you into a pit filled with annoying ass enemies. The fight is painfully mid and they're not the hardest boss on the list, but I can definitely see them giving some people issues due to the sheer amount of them. I mean, they have a similar issue like the previous guys, they're all just so freaking aggressive. I'm gonna be honest, I don't have that much left to say about this encounter. Again, it's just painfully mid. They try taking the element of the original and turn it up a notch, but in the laziest way possible, by just adding more enemies. The OST for both are even the same. Again, this fight just felt like a lazy reskin of a much better one. Crucible Knight duo. They can rot in hell. That's all I have to say. Okay, I'm gonna at least explain why I don't like this fight. Just like the previous guys I've mentioned, these two don't complement each other at all. Sure, they share similar armor and name and have some similar fighting styles, but gameplay wise, they're terrible when paired together. Again, just the sheer aggression of both of them is enough to make you pull your hair out. Now the only reason why they aren't lower is because 1, you can use summons to distract one of them, making the fight somewhat more tolerable, and 2, they are optional, which means you can come back at a stronger level and defeat them. But that said, they're still kinda ass. I mean, what's with Souls games and throwing 2 super fast paced enemies in one room and calling it a boss fight? On their own, they're pretty okay, but again, fighting them together is just overkill. Also, good luck trying to heal because the second these guys sense you're reaching to grab your flask, they will just charge in and attack you. Here we go with yet another unfun fight. I usually recommend fighting the Valiant Gargoyles at a somewhat higher level, just so you can defeat them quickly and get it over with. On their own, they're not bad, but together they're just really annoying, especially with the poison mist that can stun lock you for some reason. Like, how does that even work? At least only one of them start the fight until it reaches half health. Not a super bad fight, but just super unremarkable and frustrating at times. Ludenzahlen. The devs of Dark Souls 2 realized that Ava was a decent boss fight, so you know what they did? They added 2 of them in a room and called it a day. First of all, let's not forget the horrible runback. If you thought Surlon runback was bad, well, you've been mistaken because this shit is fucking horrible. Like, what were they thinking? Also, the bosses are just an exact copy of Ava, except the second one can now self-heal, which is so annoying because it moves around a lot, which does not complement the slow pace of Dark Souls 2. Ludenzahlen are just not a fun fight, at least in my opinion. The Capra Demon, one of the most insufferable bosses in FromSoft history. But you know the weirdest thing about it? I've never really struggled with the fight itself. It's the camera that I and a lot of people struggled with the most. And the reason why I call this encounter insufferable is because it's just a multi-enemy boss placed in a small cramped area. Like, okay, cool. If you wanted to place 3 enemies in an area and call it a boss fight, go ahead. But at least choose 3 enemies that complement each other. And also not put them in a cramped tight area. You see, the Capra Demon is very fast and aggressive, and so are his dogs. So putting them in someone's backyard just feels a bit disrespectful towards the player. But yeah, this encounter sucks and these 2 dogs can go rot in hell. The man-eaters are, well, not great. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them because there isn't much to say. Their attack pattern is annoying, they'll swoop in to hit you and then fly off into the air, making the fight feel unnecessarily dragged out. To make things worse, their attacks feel clunky and unpredictable, with some moves that can easily knock you off the narrow bridge you're fighting on. They're more frustrating than fun. Between their janky movements and the awkward arena, it's hard to enjoy the fight. There's nothing really memorable or engaging about it. It just feels like a poorly designed boss fight. Okay, to be fair, at least the scenery is a bit nice, but everything else about this fight sucks. So yeah, bad boss fight, that's all there is to it. The man-eaters don't offer much besides irritation, and they're one of the weakest fights in the game. Sekiro has one of the best combat ever in gaming, and similar to the other Souls games, it's more focused on 1v1 encounters. So tell me why FromSoft thought it was a good idea to place 2 overly aggressive bosses in the same room. I mean, to be fair, that's pretty much all the guys I've just mentioned so far, but the Guardian Ape was already a difficult fight, one that was actually somewhat enjoyable. However, this version sucks ass because now you have to focus on 2 apes at the same time. It's usually best to kill the brown one first, as that will make focusing on the headless one much easier, and at least the brown one doesn't have a lot of health, but again, it's hard to focus on each because both of them are always so close to each other. So yeah, this was not an enjoyable Gank fight. Now we're moving on to the bosses that are somewhat better, and here we have the Skeleton Lords. When you're into the arena, you face 3 large skeletons, each wielding a different weapon. However, defeating them only triggers the second phase of the fight, where waves of smaller skeletons flood the arena. While it's kinda cool fighting a skeleton army, the execution is rather lackluster. The Skeleton Lords themselves are extremely easy to defeat as their attacks are slow and easily telegraphed. The real challenge comes from managing the hordes of smaller skeletons, which can overwhelm you if you're not careful. However, this isn't enough to make the fight feel exciting or memorable. Overall, the Skeleton Lords are just meh. They're not bad enough to be frustrating, but they're not good enough to stand out either. They're just there filling space in the game. The Crystallians are the definition of okay, but one thing I like that gave me a scare on my very first playthrough is the fact that they don't take a lot of damage until, you know, their skin breaks and they go from scary and intimidating to absolute pushovers. The moveset is also something I'm very 50-50 on. On one hand, I really like the robotic animations they have. I don't know, it makes them seem very inhuman. But at the same time, they don't have a lot in their moveset. But these are just cave bosses, so I'm gonna give them a pass. But as actual gang fights, I mean, they're not bad at all. The Ruined Sentinels are a solid fight. When you first step into the arena, you face off one sentinel on a platform, which gives you a fair one-on-one to start things off. But once you drop down to the main floor, the fight takes a chaotic turn, as the other 2 join in. The Sentinel's long-reaching halberd attacks and fast movement can be overwhelming, especially when all 3 are active. Dodging their wide, sweeping attacks, for example, can feel hectic if you get cornered. The good thing is that their health pool is low enough to not make the fight feel dragged out. The arena itself is a bit of a mixed bag as it's just boring looking, but that's about it. Overall, the Ruined Sentinels are a decent fight. They require good crowd control, but the fight can sometimes feel, I don't know, more frustrating than fun. Okay, remember the Dragon Rider in the early parts of the game? Picture that, but with 2 this time. Yep, that's the fight, except one shoots arrows while the other uses a halberd. This fight is pretty mid. Not bad, just bland and kinda boring. They're also surprisingly easy, which I like because that means I don't have to spend too much time fighting a reskin. Champion's Gravetender is an interesting duo fight, but it doesn't really live up to its potential. The fight starts with you fighting a pack of wolves alongside the Gravetender. The wolves can be annoying to deal with, especially since they like to dart around and, interrupt your attacks, but they're not too difficult to handle. Once the wolves are gone, the Gravetender is fairly easy to deal with on his own. His moveset is simple and doesn't offer much of a challenge, however the second phase adds a bit more intensity when the Great Wolf enters the arena. The Great Wolf is the real highlight of the fight, with fast, aggressive attacks that require sharp timing and positioning to avoid. While the Great Wolf adds some excitement, the fight as a whole feels uneven. The Gravetender's portion of the encounter is underwhelming and the wolves at the start can feel like filler. It's not a terrible boss, but it's also not particularly memorable either. The original Bell Gargoyle fight, and also the best one compared to the rest, but despite that, the Bell Gargoyles aren't a bad fight, but also I wouldn't say they're a super good one either, at least in my opinion. Not saying they're bad, but fighting them both at the same time with the slowness of Dark Souls 1 can really get annoying. However, the fight is way more enjoyable when you get rid of the first one as quickly as possible. And to be fair, the game does give you enough time to take down the first one's health so that managing the second one could be easier. Again, as much as I hate duo fights, I like when both enemies aren't constantly on your ass, so that's why these guys rank a bit higher than the rest. This fight is actually pretty decent. Sure, it's just 2 reskins, but I think it's handled pretty well. The fight starts with the Misbegotten Warrior. This guy is pretty fun because his moveset reminds me more of a tame version of Gale. After a certain point, the Crucible Knight will step in, and usually these guys are a pain in the ass when they're paired together, but not this guy. You see, they actually made his AI somewhat chill, and he will only fight you if you're close enough. Look, before you say anything, I do know that's how most duo fights work, but for some reason, you can still tell that the enemy is super aggressive with the other ones. Also, I'm gonna go on a small detour real quick, but don't worry, it still relates to this. I really like the way Black Myth Wukong handled boss fights like these. You know, the duo or gank fights. The enemies actually take turns to fight you, and sometimes they pull off cool and unique combos together. I just wish FromSoft implemented that style of gank fights instead of just, 2 beefed up enemies in a room. Okay, I'm done. But again, don't get me wrong, the Crucible Knight and Misbegotten Warrior fight is still pretty decent. As much as I don't like Shadows of Yharnam, I can at least say that they aren't a boring fight, because they will keep you on the edge of your seat. The reason why I say this is because you have to keep focusing on all 3 shadows, which can be a bit frustrating at first until you focus on the weak link. After taking down one of them, the other 2 grow snakes out of their head and now they can summon a giant snake out the ground. Is it an annoying attack? Yes. But is it cool looking? Also yes. Now despite this, the Shadows of Yharnam is still one of my least favorite boss in Bloodborne, but as a gank fight, compared to the rest, they're actually pretty decent, mostly because they aren't constantly hawking you down. On my last playthrough of Dark Souls 2, I actually decided to fight the Dark Lurker, mostly because a lot of people are hyping it up saying that it was one of the best fights in the game, and to be honest, it's not bad, but I didn't enjoy the fight too much. Well, to be fair though, what really made me hate it was how tedious it was to get back to it, and the fact that it was a gank fight. But for the sake of this video, compared to most other gank fights, it's actually good. Now let's talk about the fight itself. The Dark Lurker, just like many other gank fights, starts off with you just fighting one. Its attacks mostly consist of raining soul balls, a dark sword attack, and a dark laser beam. And after you get its health past 50%, it will summon a clone of itself, and this is where most of the difficulty comes from. Both of them share the same health, but their damage output can be insane. Some moves can two-shot you at times. But that aside, visually, Dark Lurker is definitely one of the coolest looking encounters in the entire game, mostly because of how cool its attacks look. But yeah, Dark Lurker, pretty good as a gank fight. At 4th place we have the fan favorite Ornstein and Smo. Some people may consider this a controversial placement since they're not at number 1, but compared to the other bosses I think it's fair to place them here. At first I never really saw the hype for them, but after refighting them I realized that they're actually really good, and they both complement each other really well. Ornstein being the fast and nimble one, while Smo being the big and slow but heavy hitting one. I find this fight easier if you take out Ornstein first and leave Smo for last, because during the second phase one of them gets souped up and Super Smo is definitely easier to handle. His attacks basically remain the same, except he will do this dump truck ass slam attack that can do a lot of damage if you get caught. Overall, as much as I love this fight, I also hate it as well due to how FromSoft tried their best to replicate the aura that these two had. However, most of their dual bosses in the future aren't balanced as well as Ornstein and Smo, and that's a shame. When it comes down to great duo fights, you can't leave out these two, because they're really well done. It's like FromSoft actually took time to cook with them. But as the fight goes on, you can tell they're a spectacle. One of the main reasons why I like this fight so much is because they both actually take turns to attack you, which is pretty great. But that doesn't mean the fight is easy, cause oh boy, these two, they can rip you a new one. You see, despite how they take turns, they're still aggressive enough not to make the fight a complete pushover, and that's what I like. Most of the times when they're fighting the angry one, the other will just stay back and mostly attack from a distance with its fire and poison attacks. They will try to attack you if you're close enough, but not as much as the aggressive one. What the game did to balance this out though is making their individual health pool and their overall moveset small. But after defeating both of them, job's not finished because one of them will revive itself and become even more powerful. This is where the real fight starts. Yes, the real fight. Because man, this thing is brutal. It's way more aggressive and its attacks are 10 times more deadly, but it's not impossible. Again, despite how hard this battle was, there wasn't a point where I was super angry or upset, because if I died, I knew it was 100% my fault. Now my only small complaint is that the fight does drag on for a bit, but it's still good regardless, and that's why I placed it at 3rd place. The Abyss Watchers were my first roadblock in Dark Souls 3, and yes, they're technically a gang fight. However, unlike most gang fights in the earlier parts of this video, they're actually balanced really well, because while they may be super aggressive, they don't have a lot of health, which makes the fight goes by smoother. And not only that, but a 3rd Abyss Watcher will wake up and fight the other two with you. But the real fight starts in the 2nd phase, as the final Watcher uses his friend's essence to power himself up, and now his sword is engulfed in flames. In this phase, he's even more aggressive than before. Okay, holy shit, how many times did I say aggressive in this video? Anyways, he also has way more range, but unfortunately, his health is surprisingly low, which makes the fight a lot easier. Ultimately, the Abyss Watcher is one of the best Soulsborne boss, period. Lothric and Lorien. These two aren't your traditional gang fight, but since you technically need to kill both of them in order to win, I still decided to place them here. I mean, everything about this fight is engaging. I really love this fight a lot. The story, the build up, everything. It's one of those somewhat simple but memorable encounters. Their attacks are also pretty cool, especially the teleportation. And I like how in the 2nd phase you have to kill Lothric, as if you don't, he will just keep reviving Lorien. This is definitely an underrated boss fight for sure, which deserves more love, and it's my personal favorite multi-enemy fight in the series. Also, I forgot about the Throne Defenders and Sister Frieda. Frieda would most likely be in the top 10, while the Throne Defenders, I don't know, somewhere in the middle, closer to the bottom. That's it. I hope you guys have a good one, and thank you for watching this video.